the winter of 1944 found the Western Allies, after the dizzying successes of the Normandy breakout, the subsequent rapid pursuit across France, and the liberation of Paris, in a dangerous state of overconfidence and acute logistical strain. Senior Allied commanders, most notably General Dwight D. Eisenhower, harbored a deeply held conviction that the German army had been utterly defeated in the West and was fundamentally incapable of mounting any major, organized counteroffensive of significance. American troops, particularly those holding the quiet, heavily wooded sector of the Ardennes forest, a sprawling, seemingly impassable region, were disproportionately composed of green, inexperienced replacements, or weary veteran units resting and refitting for the decisive final push toward the Rhine. This sector was chosen precisely because intelligence deemed it naturally impassable for a major armored attack, and the persistent heavy fog and cloud cover created the perfect fatal conditions for the massive surprise that was about to unfold on the Western Front. Adolf Hitler, increasingly isolated in his East Prussian command bunker, but obsessed with achieving a psychological and political miracle, conceived the massive counteroffensive, codenamed Operation Watch, on the Rhine, Wacht am Rhein. His strategic goal was audacious, bordering on the suicidal: to launch a massive armored thrust through the lightly held American lines in the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, seize the vital Belgian port of Antwerp, the Allies' main logistical gateway, and thereby effectively split the Allied armies, separating the British from the Americans. Hitler believed this catastrophic blow would force the Western Allies to sue for a negotiated peace, allowing Germany to focus its entire remaining military might back on the Eastern Front. The plan was fundamentally flawed and militarily impossible given Germany's extreme deficits in fuel and manpower, but its sheer ambition and the complete operational secrecy achieved created immense initial momentum. The German assault began with terrifying synchronization at dawn on December 16, 1944. Three massive German armies, the 5th Panzer Army, the 6th Panzer Army, composed of elite SS units, and the 7th Army, launched a brutal, rapid assault across an extended 80-mile front. The opening hours of the offensive were characterized by complete and stunning tactical surprise. The inexperienced American troops holding the line were instantly and completely overwhelmed by the sheer crushing scale of the attack, which included a ferocious, concentrated artillery barrage and the rapid advance of elite panzer divisions. Key communications centers were seized within hours, entire American regiments were quickly encircled and captured, and a deep, alarming penetration was achieved almost immediately, confirming the success of the initial shock factor and carving a massive, permanent bulge into the Allied line. The initial German success was augmented and spearheaded by specialized sabotage units operating deep behind American lines to sow maximum confusion. Operation Greif, led by the infamous SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny, involved highly trained German commandos who had infiltrated the American rear. These men wore captured American uniforms, drove captured Allied jeeps, and spoke fluent English. Their immediate mission was to sow absolute chaos, disrupt vital communications, change critical road signs to misdirect units, and seize key river bridges before they could be demolished. Although ultimately unsuccessful in achieving their main strategic objectives, The persistent, wild rumors of these saboteurs spread rapidly throughout the American rear echelons, creating mass paranoia, fear, and severely slowing down critical troop and logistical movements as military police obsessively interrogated any soldier who couldn't answer detailed American trivia. The crucial, yet seemingly insignificant early objective for the German 5th Panzer Army was the small, strategically vital town of Bastogne in southern Belgium. While the town itself held little military value beyond a handful of buildings, it served as the critical hub for 7 major roads leading through the dense, road-poor Ardennes region. Control of Bastogne was absolutely essential for the rapid movement of German armour and mechanized infantry toward the Meuse River, and ultimately Antwerp. The desperate defense of this key junction fell primarily to the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, Screaming Eagles, which was rushed into the area just hours before the German armoured spearheads arrived. Their rapid and timely deployment effectively turned what should have been an immediate German armoured advantage into a costly, protracted, and ultimately decisive siege. The ensuing siege of Bastogne became the undisputed symbolic heart of American resilience and defiance during the entire battle. The 101st Airborne, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division, found themselves completely surrounded and cut off from supply, yet they held out courageously against repeated, heavy German assaults in brutal deep freeze conditions. When the Germans demanded surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, issued the legendary, immortal one-word reply, "Nuts." This defiant and contemptuous response instantly became a rallying cry for the entire Allied front. The besieged soldiers endured freezing temperatures, a severe lack of ammunition, and critical medical supply shortages, tying down crucial, irreplaceable German panzer divisions that should have been advancing rapidly toward the Meuse. While the 101st fought their desperate battle at Bastogne, another key turning point was simultaneously unfolding on the northern shoulder of the Bulge, a line led by the tenacious US V Corps. The meticulously planned German offensive hinged on the swift early capture of the twin Belgian towns and the high ground of Elsenborn Ridge and the surrounding areas near Malmedy. The stubborn, highly disciplined defense mounted here, led by the veteran 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions, proved entirely immovable. The difficult, broken terrain and the ferocious, tenacious defense successfully stalled the powerful armored spearhead of the elite 6th Panzer Army, forcing it to consume precious, irreplaceable fuel and delaying its advance by critical, decisive days. The failure to breach the northern shoulder was the first major and irreversible strategic setback for the entire German plan. The Malmedy area was also the site of one of the war's worst and most appalling atrocities against American troops, a crime that shocked the Allied world. On December 17, 1944, a column of over 150 captured American soldiers, taken prisoner by the Kampfgruppe Piper, a hardened combat group from the 1st SS Panzer Division, was machine-gunned in cold blood in a field near Malmedy. Over 84 American prisoners of war, POWs, were brutally murdered. News of the horrific Malmedy massacre spread like wildfire among the Allied troops, hardening their resolve, eliminating any lingering doubts about German brutality, and leading many to refuse to take SS prisoners, turning the battlefield into an even more merciless and unforgiving fight to the death. The entire German strategy, even more than surprise, was predicated on speed, and crucially, the successful capture of immense Allied fuel dumps. The German supply chain was already critically low on gasoline and diesel, and the leading panzer divisions could not possibly hope to reach the Meuse River, let alone Antwerp, without successfully resupplying from captured American stocks. As the American defense rapidly solidified and the advance slowed, German armored columns were increasingly forced to abandon their tanks due to dry fuel tanks. The battle essentially became a deadly, desperate race against the empty gauge, a fundamental logistical race the Germans inevitably lost, confirming the absolute impossibility of the operation's ambitious goals from a supply standpoint. By December 23rd, the weather finally broke, marking a decisive shift in the operational environment. For the critical first week of the battle, heavy cloud cover, fog, and snow had effectively grounded the vast, superior Allied air forces. When the skies miraculously cleared, the overwhelming Allied air superiority immediately became the single, decisive factor in the battle's outcome. Thousands of relentless sorties were flown by the British and American air forces, targeting German supply columns, critical railroad yards, and most importantly, the vulnerable, fuel-starved panzer units stuck on crowded Ardennes roads. The relentless air attacks destroyed Germany's already fragile logistical capacity, smashed tank formations, and prevented the delivery of much-needed supplies and ammunition to the spearheads. The crucial American counterattack was commanded by the irascible, dynamic General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army. In a truly monumental feat of logistical genius and command agility, Patton successfully disengaged his entire army from its offensive commitments in the distant Saar region, wheeled it a full 90 degrees north, and covered over 100 miles of icy, difficult roads in less than 72 hours. This rapid mass maneuver was completely unexpected by the German High Command and demonstrated superior Allied mobility, logistics, and command flexibility. Patton's swiftly moved forces delivered the decisive, crushing blow, slicing into the exposed German flank and beginning the relentless, fighting relief of the besieged 101st Airborne at Bastogne. The relief of Bastogne on December 26th marked the definitive psychological and strategic turning point of the entire battle. The sight of Patton's lead tanks breaking through the German encirclement instantly lifted the sinking morale of the entire Allied front. The besieged troops had heroically held the critical road hub for 10 agonizing days, completely destroying the German timetable and consuming Hitler's last operational reserves of armor and infantry. The critical failure to take Bastogne, combined with the equally successful defense of the northern shoulder at Elsenborn, meant the entire strategic objective of reaching the Meuse and Antwerp was now completely unattainable, and the offensive had failed. With the initial German momentum arrested, the Battle of the Bulge rapidly shifted from a German offensive to a brutal Allied grinding operation aimed at systematically eliminating the Bulge. From late December onward, the Americans and British began a systematic pincer movement, attacking from the north and the south to flatten the deep penetration and push the Germans back to their starting positions. The Allied effort was characterized by an overwhelming and irresistible advantage in readily available manpower, massive artillery fire, and critically, continuous air power. German forces, now severely low on fuel, ammunition, and replacements, began a costly, grinding retreat under continuous Allied pressure. The human cost for the United States Army was tragically staggering, confirming the battle as America's toughest fight. The Battle of the Bulge resulted in approximately 19,000 Americans killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 captured or missing, totaling over 108,000 casualties. This made it the single largest and costliest land battle ever fought by the U.S. Army in World War II. For the German Army, the losses were even more catastrophic and irreversible. Between 80,000 and 100,000 casualties, and the irreplaceable loss of over 1,000 aircraft and nearly 800 tanks and heavy assault guns. The battle effectively consumed Hitler's last strategic reserves of both experienced men and vital war material. The massive and catastrophic loss of irreplaceable elite soldiers, and more critically, hundreds of tanks, assault guns, and thousands of tons of fuel, ensured that Germany could never again mount a major offensive of any significance on the Western Front. This colossal, terminal drain on resources critically weakened the already fragile German defenses on the Eastern Front as well, allowing the relentlessly advancing Soviet Red Army to accelerate its advance into the heart of the Reich in the ensuing weeks. The crucial, defining element of the American fighting spirit during the initial chaos was the exemplary performance of the junior leaders and small units. When established divisions were suddenly shattered and communications were severed by the initial surprise, it was the individual courage, tenacity, and decentralized initiative of squad leaders, sergeants, and lieutenants that prevented a total rout. Small, isolated pockets of resistance, often operating without any communication or command from headquarters, effectively tied down German spearheads, conducted local ambushes, and denied the Germans the necessary rapid advance, proving that the American army was tactically flexible and immensely resilient under extreme pressure. The battle starkly highlighted the supreme and ultimate importance of logistics and supply for the successful execution of the Allied war effort. Even when the front lines were collapsing, the vast unmatched industrial might of the United States allowed for the immediate and rapid mobilization of reinforcements, replacement equipment, and massive fuel stocks required to support Patton's lightning maneuver north. In sharp contrast, the German armies were critically and fatally hamstrung by limited fuel reserves and the immediate, absolute lack of replacements for both men and damaged tanks and vehicles. The intense and prolonged exposure to the brutal winter weather was an enemy as formidable as the German army itself. Temperatures frequently plunged far below freezing, and soldiers suffered terribly from acute frostbite, debilitating trench foot, and severe exposure. Weapons often froze solid, jammed, and required constant, careful maintenance to keep functioning reliably. The terrible inability to evacuate the severely wounded, especially during the protracted siege of Bastogne, added immeasurably to the horror and the final casualty count, cementing the memory of the Bulge as a ferocious fight against both man and nature. The crucial, often overlooked role of the African-American soldiers was highlighted during the intense manpower and supply crisis. Facing critical manpower shortages, General Eisenhower issued a desperate call for volunteers, and thousands of black servicemen, many of whom were previously strictly relegated to segregated service and logistics roles, stepped forward to serve in integrated combat units. These brave black tankers and infantrymen served with distinction, proving their courage and commitment on the front lines, and contributing significantly to the battle's success, helping to permanently break down some segregation barriers in the process. The Allied military command structure, although momentarily fragmented by the massive surprise attack, ultimately proved its resilience and flexibility. Both Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, and Field Marshal Montgomery, who temporarily commanded the Northern Shoulder forces, managed to coordinate massive, complex troop movements and a comprehensive counteroffensive across two different nations and involving two different armies. The necessary willingness to entrust Patton with the massive, high-risk flanking maneuver demonstrated the capacity for flexible, aggressive, and superior high-level decision-making that was absolutely essential for securing victory. The German use of the elite V-2 rocket during the battle, though ultimately ineffective in changing the strategic outcome, added a new and terrifying element of indiscriminate terror. Launched from mobile sites deep behind the lines, these powerful ballistic missiles targeted Allied logistics hubs and civilian cities like Antwerp and Liège. They were a clear, desperate sign of German technological desperation and a chilling glimpse into the future of warfare. But they possessed no tactical impact whatsoever on the unfolding land battle in the Ardennes. The Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge was not merely a defensive triumph. It fundamentally and irrevocably changed the strategic timeline of the war in the West. By forcing Germany to commit and utterly expend its last strategic reserves of armor and infantry in the West, the battle virtually guaranteed that the subsequent Allied drive across the Rhine and eventually into the German heartland would face minimal, disorganized, and exhausted organized resistance, accelerating the final collapse of the Third Reich. The battle cemented the enduring reputation of the American fighting man in Europe in the eyes of their allies and their enemies alike. Before the Bulge, some German commanders still held the American army in lesser regard than the British or the battle-hardened Soviets. The ferocious, tenacious defense mounted by the GIs, often surrounded, freezing, and against overwhelming odds, shattered this arrogant view. Their ability to hold Bastogne and the northern shoulder under extreme pressure demonstrated a level of combat endurance, discipline, and initiative that forever secured their place as a formidable fighting force. The end of the battle on January 25, 1945, saw the front lines essentially restored to where they had been 5 weeks prior. The marginal land recovered was strategically insignificant, but the devastating cost to the German army was absolute and terminal. The German forces had been stripped bare of the men, tanks, and operational mobility needed to defend the homeland from the east and the west. The Battle of the Bulge, while America's toughest and most costly fight, guaranteed the rapid and inevitable collapse of the Western Front in the final months of the war. The enduring and powerful legacy of the Battle of the Bulge is that it was not won by a single general or a brilliant, perfect tactical plan, but by the sheer determination, decentralized initiative, and ultimate sacrifice of the American line troops. The individual soldier, freezing in a forgotten foxhole, holding their position when surrounded, and exhibiting initiative when all communications failed, successfully transformed Hitler's desperate, bold gamble into his final, fatal military miscalculation, definitively clearing the path for the final, victorious Allied march to the Rhine.